In the quiet, forgotten town of Cold Hollow, there stood a decrepit mansion, long abandoned and whispered to be cursed. No one dared to enter, for the locals spoke of strange disappearances and unnatural events surrounding the house. It was said that once you crossed the threshold, you were no longer the same, and escape was impossible except for one. 5 people, strangers to each other, found themselves drawn to the house one stormy night. Each had received an eerie letter in the mail, inviting them for a chance at a life-changing fortune. The only condition? Survive the night in the cursed house that as they entered, the doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them in. The atmosphere thickened with dread, the walls seemed to close in, and the very air felt alive with malevolent intent. What they didn't know was that the house had a will of its own, feeding on fear, suffering, and despair. Time twisted inside the mansion. Every room was different. Some appeared as they had in their prime, while others were in ruins, decayed with centuries of neglect. Shadows flickered and whispers echoed in the distance, but nothing felt real. The clock in the grand hallway was stuck at midnight, and no matter how much time passed, the night would not end. One by one, the guests began to unravel. Their pasts, their darkest secrets, were used against them, as the house toyed with their minds. Hallucinations of loved ones, terrifying creatures from nightmares, and worst of all, their own reflections seemed to mock them at every turn. The house was alive, and it had one rule: only one could escape. As the night progressed, alliances formed and crumbled. Trust was a fragile thing, especially when survival was at stake. Each person realized that in order to leave, they had to betray the others. But what they didn't know was that the house thrived on their desperation. It fed off the violence and the broken promises, growing stronger with every moment that in the final hour before dawn. The house revealed its final test, a labyrinth beneath the mansion, filled with impossible choices and deadly traps. The survivors made their way through, haunted by the spirits of those who had failed before them. One by one, they fell, either by the house's cruel design or each other's hands. When the first light of morning broke through the windows, only one remained, a lone figure standing at the mansion's entrance, covered in the blood of their former companions. The door creaked open, and they stepped out, forever changed. But as they turned to leave, the house whispered a chilling truth: no one ever truly escapes. The figure walked into the rising sun, haunted by the memories of that cursed night, knowing that the house would call them back one day. And when it did, there would be no escape. Months passed, but the survivor could not shake the weight of that night. Nightmares plagued their sleep, visions of the house calling, of whispers in the dark, of the screams of those who didn't make it out. It became harder to distinguish reality from the horrors still lurking in their mind. The world outside the cursed mansion felt wrong, as if they had left a part of themselves behind. One evening, a letter appeared on their doorstep. The envelope was identical to the one that had invited them to the house months before. Same age parchment, same cryptic seal. Hands trembling, they tore it open. Your time is not over. Return to claim your fate. The survivor's heart pounded. How could this be happening? They had escaped, hadn't they? Yet deep down, they knew the truth. The house hadn't let them go, it had merely allowed them a brief reprieve. It wanted them back. But this time, they would not be the only one returning. In the weeks that followed, the survivor began noticing strange things. People, total strangers, would stare at them on the street with hollow eyes. Some would whisper their name when they passed by, though they had never met. Doors to rooms they hadn't entered would creak open in their home, and the reflection in the mirror seemed off, as if watching them rather than reflecting. And then came the visitors. It started with a knock late at night. 3 strangers stood on the porch, each holding a letter identical to the one the survivor had received. "It's happening again, isn't it?" one of them asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The house is calling us." Each of the visitors had their own story. One was a man who had lost his wife in the cursed mansion years ago. He had never stopped searching for her, believing she might still be trapped within. Another was a young woman whose brother had vanished inside just months before. The third, a quiet and sullen figure, claimed to have been to the house as a child, though no one could verify his story. They were all connected to the mansion in some way, drawn together by its malevolent force. And they knew that the house would not stop until they returned. But this time, they wouldn't go as victims. The survivor realized that there was only one choice. The house had to be destroyed. If they returned, they could find a way to end its curse once and for all. Together, they armed themselves with knowledge, researching the history of the mansion, seeking out occult symbols, and gathering anything that might weaken the ancient evil lurking within. They learned of a ritual and obscure, dangerous spell that might sever the house's connection to the living world. With little hope, but no other options, the group set out to return to Cold Hollow. The town was as eerie as ever, as if it had been frozen in time since that terrible night. The mansion loomed in the distance, its windows dark, like eyes watching their every move. But something was different this time. The air around the house crackled with energy, and the front door stood slightly ajar, as if expecting their arrival. The group entered determined. The survivor felt the familiar suffocating dread settle over them. But this time, they didn't run. They headed straight for the heart of the mansion, deeper than they had ever gone before, down into the labyrinth beneath the floorboards. The air grew colder with every step, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The house knew why they had come, and it would not let them succeed without a fight. In the darkness, the group began the ritual. As they chanted the ancient words, the house responded violently. Walls trembled, floors cracked, and from the shadows, twisted figures emerged. These were the souls the house had consumed over the centuries, now bound to its will. The survivors fought to hold the creatures at bay, but it became clear that the house was too powerful. The ground beneath them gave way, and they found themselves in a cavernous void beneath the mansion, the true source of its evil. A swirling mass of shadows and agony, a creature older than time itself, waited for them. It had no form, but its presence was suffocating. As the last line of the ritual was spoken, the survivor realized the horrible truth to end the curse. One of them had to stay behind, to become the new vessel for the entity's power. It was the only way to trap it within the house forever. A sacrifice. Without hesitation, the man who had lost his wife stepped forward. "I couldn't save her," he whispered, "but maybe this is how I can be with her again." Before anyone could stop him, he walked into the swirling mass and disappeared. The ground shook violently as the house screamed in fury, and then silence. The survivors found themselves back at the mansion's entrance, the first rays of dawn breaking the horizon. The house stood still, lifeless. The curse had ended, or so they thought. As they turned to leave, the survivor glanced back one last time. For just a moment, in one of the upper windows, they saw a shadowy figure watching them, a man standing next to a woman, his hand resting on her shoulder. They were never truly free. The house may have lost this battle, but it was patient, and it would call again.